You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Kivelevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Clear the aisles, the Projectionist Has Semicha. Hi, I'm here with Rabbi Kolakowski, but I'm not really with him. He's with me mentally and with his heart and soul, but he's somewhere on one of our nation's great highways, making his way back.
On the LIE, I think.
Oh, that's definitely one of the great highways. The Long Island Expressway. Whoa, that is so much has happened on that piece of concrete. So many wonderful days with a film that really caught my fancy. It's something I've avoided for a long time because I really thought it would be a plotting, a costume drama where the accents would be all highfalutin and fake and nothing to do with the actual time period, and maybe just really overdone in terms of Technicolor. And although it was one of the most expensive films ever made in England up until that time, Richard Thorpe's 1951 Ivanhoe, it really caught my interest, and I found myself who wrote the book Ivanhoe in 1818, I believe, or 1819, really meant the book as a criticism of modern-day England. And although he was a person with great historical interest who read voluminously on what was the world of the past, he was eager to create fictions that built on the past and would comment on the situation in Europe and England and Europe and the world in general. And that's sort of what the great historical fiction writers are able to do. Nobody really believes that you're really transported back to that time. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to understand a word. You'd be speaking in Old English, and you would probably be shattered by some sort of spear that would carve you in half. It was definitely it's not as the world that he conjures up is a little bit cleaner, and but it does capture the philosophical and ethical issues that were prevalent in that time, and especially in the period that he's referring to, the period of the Crusades, the First Crusade, the battles between the Saxons and the Normans. And what comes out really strongly in his book and in the film is how the Jews are suffering regardless. And although Ivanhoe, who is this valiant knight who has joined the Crusades, and we know what the Crusades wreaked upon so many communities in Germany and all the way down into Eretz Yisrael. But during the battle of the Crusades, fighting the infidels, fighting the Arabs, fighting the Muslims, King Richard, known as the Lionhearted, was somehow captured and taken captive by the powers that be in the Habsburg Empire, by the Austrians, that was known as the Holy Roman Empire at that time. And he was presumed captured or dead. And I think it's a matter of historical record that there was a grassroots effort to free him, and that Jews were very important in doing that. Jewish moneylenders and other men of wealth within England, connecting themselves to their European contacts, were able to help raise the money that was able to bring King Richard back to England. Now, of course, Richard, although he has been portrayed in many films as this great heroic figure, was no good friend of the Jews. And in fact, the massacres that happened in England, such as the massacre of the Jews of York, occurred after Richard returned. So the film, the book and the film, of course, don't necessarily indicate how bad Richard was, but it definitely tells you that when Richard wasn't around, his brother John was ready to demonize and massacre all the Jews. The book did, and the film followed, is placing the most the character that you have the most feeling for, the character that you have the most sympathy for, the character that is perhaps the most understanding of the wiles and idiocies of the interesting battles between the Normans and the Saxons, it is a Jew. And it's not necessarily a wise Jewish man like Gotthold Ephraim Lessing did in his play Nathan the Wise, but actually the wise Jewish man's daughter, Rebecca. And Rebecca is considered by many one of the most incredible fictional characters because, unlike in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, she is the daughter, although she's still the daughter of a moneylender, she does not necessarily just desire only absorption into the Christian world, into the world of humanity. She wants to keep the faith of her fathers, the faith of Israel. And she is incredibly beautiful, and everyone is attracted to her. And she remains chaste. She remains someone who is committed to healing. She has been trained by her mother, it seems, or some other Jewish woman who had been burned as a witch for her. She becomes connected to the titular character, Sir Wilfrid of Ivanhoe, because he is wounded in a battle. And this is a battle that takes place in a joust in order to somehow find out information from these Knights of the Templar, or whoever they are, where perhaps what is truly going on with King Richard. But he's wounded by Sir Gilbert, and since he's not able to finish the joust, he is nursed back to health by Rebecca, and Rebecca develops an affection for him. And it's natural, the way Sir Walter Scott draws the story, that someone who is denied access into the world, someone who has been pushed around, someone who has been demonized, should want entry into that world. And Sir Walter Scott recognizes that Rebecca has that desire, Rebecca for this knight. But Sir Walter Scott is mature enough to realize that those feelings aren't the feelings of true love. They're the feelings of infatuation, of wanting something different, of wanting to change your life, of wanting to be someone else. And this is what she actually struggles with in the book, where she comes to recognize that despite the fact that she might have easy entrance into that world because of her beauty, she remains connected to the service of the Ovis. And Walter Scott, in his book, although her father in the book is shown to be a person of avarice, a person who is into money, but the characters in the book discuss the fact that the Jews have been forced to become avaricious and greedy and engage in usury because they have been denied so much of what's considered a normal life. And if they would be given justice, then justice would mean something. And if you have a society, this is one of the things that is uttered by Rebecca, that if you have a society that does not mete out justice to all, then there is no justice in that society. This was something that Walter Scott wanted to bring forth, especially when it came to the 19th century, still pushing back the Jews and not allowing them entrance into the world fully. And he wanted to use Rebecca as a way of indicating that the Jews can be a beautiful people and that the Jews should be extolled for their virtues. That was why he wrote Ivanhoe, or one of the reasons why he wrote Ivanhoe. When the film was made, although I think there had been other versions of it, this film was made post-World War II. And I've spoken to you many times, Yitzchak, how after the Holocaust, it was finally okay to go back to recognizing anti-Semitism, Gentleman's Agreement, Crossfire, and other works that underscored this. And that now a Jew, as a Orthodox Jew, could be considered someone to have as a hero or as a heroine. The film has an all-star cast. Robert Taylor, who was one of the great handsome leading men of Hollywood. I don't know if he ever had the type of panache or the type of grit of Errol Flynn. He was definitely a handsome fellow, but he's somewhat wooden as the title character Ivanhoe. They say that he was able to, with Richard Thorpe, who made this film, he was able to make a couple of other films that had him in somewhat of a heroic swashbuckling role, although he was in his 40s at this point. It also has Joan Fontaine. Of course, Joan Fontaine and her sister Olivia de Havilland had been in a number of costume on beauty, and she is she is somehow a Saxon, could be queen if the Saxons had power again, and her name is Rowena, Princess Rowena, and she lives by her adopted father Cedric, who is actually the father of Ivanhoe. Cedric is their actor Finley Curry. And we talked about Finley Curry, it's a couple of months ago in the Cary Grant Theater. He plays Dr. Pretorius's close friend who has some sort of terrible past. And in this film, he talks quite a bit. He is Ivanhoe's father, and he is someone who also hates the Normans. But he also, when a Jewish banker comes to his house seeking refuge from the inclement weather, he wants to he feels maybe they should throw out him as an infidel, but then he decides it might be all right. He sleeps in the barn. He puts the Jewish financier in the barn. The Jewish father is played by Felix Aylmer, who is as English actor as they come, and he plays him as an old Jew with a little bit of a sort of an accent, not like Rod Steiger in The Chosen or anything like that. But you could tell that his English isn't exactly the one he actually doesn't speak English like Olivier, but just a tinge of a little bit of an accent. But he seems to be a wiser and kindlier person than Sir Walter Scott's portrayal of him in the book. When he's attacked in the middle of the night, the Jew, even though he was under Cedric's protection, he's attacked by some brigands who want his money belt. And Ivanhoe, who was snuck back, although he's not in his father's good graces, and he came to his father to see if he could raise money for the ransom of Richard, saves the Jew from being killed for his money. And to pay him back, the Jew gives him refuge in his house and promises him in Sheffield, and promises him to help raise the money. Now, it's at that time that Rebecca, Isaac's daughter, spies Sir Wilfrid. She spies him, and she's covering her mouth and most of her face with a veil. And this actress who plays her is Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor, 8 years after she makes this film, does convert to Judaism. She unfortunately buried her third husband, Mike Todd, who was supposedly the love of her life, a Jewish producer and director. And she was about to marry Eddie Fisher. And so she figured she's going to become a Jew. So she studies, of course, this is Elizabeth Taylor does, at the age of 27, and this is where, she goes through a reform conversion. But in this film, she plays the Jew. And she plays the Jew, as I said, very much into the spirit of Sir Walter Scott's book. She is going to stay towards Judaism. And of course, the conceit of the film is that even Joan Fontaine, who had been a leading lady in Hollywood, realizes that Elizabeth Taylor is a knockout, and that Ivanhoe when he does engage in battle before he gets wounded, actually goes over to where Isaac and Rebecca, where Elizabeth Taylor is sitting there as Rebecca, and he nods to her. And somehow everybody realizes how beautiful this woman is. And even the other knight, Gobert, who wounds Ivanhoe, is also incredibly, madly, erotically in love with this incredible beauty. And that is somehow, that's the dynamism in a way of the film from that point on, is that Gobert, who was played wonderfully by George Sanders. I think I've told this to you off pod. There's many characters that are supposed to play intelligent villains, thoughtful villains, philosophical bad guys, heavies. No one does it better than George. He, even in his earlier films, where he wasn't necessarily the stock bad guy, you realize that he wasn't just a mannequin mouthing words that he had memorized. He was obviously a very thoughtful person, and he brought that to the roles that he played. You know, both of us, of course, love him in Village of the Damned, which is one of the great English horror films. And he is again wonderfully intelligent and heroic in that film. In this film, he's stuck in a bad position. He's working for King John. He's madly infatuated with this Jew, and he is actually, as the story makes clear, he's actually fought Ivanhoe in the past when somehow in Acre, which of course Aku in Eretz Yisrael, they had somehow fought in battle. And there's no question about it that George Sanders is much more of a real life figure than Robert Taylor is, but they are both in a way caught up with Rebecca. And although Joan Fontaine, who is, as the film points out, has been a lover of Ivanhoe, and even as children or as youngsters, similar to Romeo and Juliet, they had cut their wrists together and somehow allowed the blood of one to flow into the other. She realizes the type of appeal, the type of power that Rebecca yields. I have to tell you that although Joan Fontaine could outact Elizabeth Taylor, and Elizabeth Taylor, I think, said after the film that she felt she really didn't really have a meaty role, her physical presence, her incredible beauty, her virginal beauty, because she's dressed in white a lot. She doesn't look anything like that, donut-eating matron of her later years that John Belushi, I think, made himself up, did an Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, here you really see Liz. You see why she was so striking. And to me, it was like the beauty of Klal Yisrael, the beauty of Knesset Yisrael. I'll go out on a limb and say, look, it's almost like she embodied the beauty of the Shekhinah here. And you actually, because as the film progresses, you can see that somehow the Jews are right in the middle. By the way, her dad walks around in this robe that has the Shem Havaya on it, along with the words Baruch Atah Elokeinu and other things on it, as if they had somehow stitched together something from some siddur that they found and they put, he walks around. It's not a talus necessarily, but it's somehow a lavush that has like aspects of Torah and Kedusha on it. And it really, again, I don't want to give everything away over here, but it actually does have some great battle scenes. And it also has, they're not called Robin Hood and his merry men, but it's clear that Sir Walter Scott meant them, and they are in the film as well. They, of course, are on the side of Richard, and they help Ivanhoe. Basically, they call him Locksley, which, of course, who Robin Hood basically was, Robin Hood Locksley. And there's another character played by Sebastian Cabot, who looks very, very much like a Friar Tuck. type of character in there. So there's a lot of great battle scenes. There's a storming of the castle. There's a lot of arrows. The jousting is realistic. The final battle, which is somehow based on this idea that God will decide the fate of Rebecca. The trial of Rebecca, where Guy Rolfe, who's played a villain many times in Hollywood, who plays King King John or Prince John, the speech that he makes, the anti-Semitism that's in the speech, the sense of the other, the sense of the xenophobia, the hatred towards the other, and how we have to drive the Jews out. I think it was very, very powerful. So it has a great score by Miklos Roja. And, unlike the film that Miklos Roja won the Academy Award for later, Ben-Hur, which also has, Charlton Heston as a Jewish protagonist, I think this does a much better job about indicating why Judaism continues to survive and why Judaism is important. What Judaism maybe even has to learn from perhaps a greater sense of connection to the Gentile world. But I can't say that it was a rollicking, exciting film, but it was definitely something that it was worth. It doesn't go on for that much longer than that.
When it comes to Richard Lionheart, I wonder historically how it would have been differently if, according to what we've always heard, was that he invited the Rambam to be his doctor, and the Rambam said he didn't have koyach to move to England. But I wonder what it would have changed British Jewry if the Rambam had acquiesced and left Egypt and gone up to England, if that would have changed the trajectory of, or if it wouldn't have mattered at all, as far as the expulsion of the Jews and the pogroms in York.
Possibly. Again, I think there's a lot of legend that swirls around Richard. I'm not sure if that story is accurate.
Yeah. I thought there was some ksaf from the Rambam where he wrote that he didn't have koyach to move, something along those lines. That's what
again, I'm not sure if chronologically it lines up. Possibly. I don't know, Yitzchak. I don't, look, you're talking about, Sir Walter Scott's writing about a period that we know the Jews were massacred and expelled afterwards, right? So, despite their contributions, despite the fact that if it wouldn't be for the Jews, they wouldn't have brought back, Richard would have been brought back. In the film, as I said, Guy Rolfe playing Prince John says even if he can't be the same king anymore, even if he is my brother, he has already been polluted by the Jews, by their witchcraft, and he's not the same person. I mean, this is really, Nazi-like anti-Semitism that I think the film was putting on display here. And what was interesting was that they were saying it happened in England too, and it's here, it's still around. And I think that's again why the film deserves more credit. I think people dismiss Ivanhoe as, it's one of those costume things. Yeah, okay, it was one of Liz's early works. I don't know if Liz has been put to better use. I mean, we talked about her in National Velvet as well, but just Liz being who she is, just the physical aura of her being combined with the idea of the pristine beauty of Yiddishkeit. You have to be a cat film, which I think is really worth your while. It's only an hour and 17 minutes. It's called Love Is News. It moves like a freight train. It's a little bit like a mix between The Front Page and It Happened One Night. It's a little bit of a newspaper story, but instead of having a murder and an execution at the heart of it, it's about an heiress who runs away from her French duke or count that she was married to, and she's this American tin can. I think they're called the tin can heiress because I think her father is some sort of real grub American, guy who made money in some sort of business that's taken over a bunch of other businesses. most of them having to do with like canned goods or things like that. The real American one, and it's played by the film. The heiress is played by Loretta Young, who, as I said, I don't think she ever was in a film where she puts in a bad performance. The lead in the film is Tyrone Power, who's actually we talked about him in Nightmare Alley, the type of performance he gave there. I mean, this isn't as nuanced, but there's quite a bit of understanding and drama in this. He plays a newspaper reporter who gets the tables turned on him because he wants to get the exclusive about Toni Gateson. That's Loretta Young's character. I think her name is Antoinette or something, but they call her Toni. And he somehow tricks his way onto her plane, and she decides to turn the tables on him, and she tells all the reporters that this is her newest lover, and this is the guy she wants to get married to. So he gets a taste of his own medicine. So the film is somewhat a comment on the paparazzi-like atmosphere that surrounds these pseudo-celebrities and how they, in a way, it's unfair to judge them and to constantly be on top of them because they have no lives. But it's also a critique on us for being so caught up in what they're doing and what the rich and famous are about, which, again, it's a screwball comedy made still during technically the years of Depression. So you're going to have to see some of the idiocies and follies of the rich. But it turns the tables a little bit and shows you that even the poor that are somehow excessively involved in what's going on with them, there's also something that needs to be checked in with them. Don Amici is plays the editor of the paper, and he does a very fine job. I really think Don Amici was an underappreciated actor. I talked about him, if you remember, a number of months ago in The Vehicle Midnight that he did with Claudette Colbert, but here he does a really funny bit. There are upstate New York judges who sound like they just came out of the Old West, who lock up Loretta Young when she goes on a joyride. There's also a Jewish reporter played by the non-Jew Walter Kiplet, who wasn't Jewish, but he uses the word kibbutz a bunch of times in the playing this fellow, obviously seemingly a very Jewish type of role. The Oscar winner Jane Darwell is in the film as well. She plays Tyrone Power's landlady. Stephen Fetchit is in it. So there's a little bit of what we would call some pretty ugly stuff in terms of the racist aspects. Stephen Fetchit is there. But it was one of the first films of Elisha Cook Jr. Elisha Cook Jr., of course, was in From the Maltese Falcon on, was a staple of film noir, a great face. And he plays this kid out of Harvard who sort of gets his first job as a reporter and sort of hangs out with Tyrone Power in the beginning of the film. It moves quickly, and it's believable, the romance that eventually really occurs between Tyrone Power's Steve Layton character, and there's a growth arc that Loretta Young happens to her too, where she comes to realize what things are important, that perhaps she's been selling short what's been going on with the people who are writing about her. So the film, I think, it's not exactly the greatest screwball comedy. It's not like something that Preston Sturges would write, but I think it's enjoyable. It moves well, and the acting, if not superb, it definitely is class A. And I really got a sense of why audiences really love Tyrone Power. He has the same sort of vulnerability that we talked about in Nightmare Alley, but also a lot of dashing dare-do, worthy really of others like Cary Grant and Errol Flynn and Gable. So that's another film I think. Love is news, and I think it still has relevance, especially today's media obsession.
2 weeks in a row with
Jack Arnold.
Jack Arnold, I can stick to Jack Arnold. He was such a prolific director, and he didn't only make science fiction, but those are the ones that are probably most well remembered. And there was the famous trilogy, probably the most famous, monster that he directed was The Creature from the Black Lagoon, that, when it was inaugurated into the canon of the Universal monsters, where, we had the classic Gothic monsters of Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolfman. And then eventually, you really, so you had Frankenstein and Dracula were in the 30s and the Wolfman in the 40s, and the 50s was kind of thought, well, that's the end of that, and they were going more into the science fiction.
It's like I agree with you. I think my wife was watching 25 Words or Less, and I think the word they had to get was creature, and Black Lagoon, creature came out right away. I think even the word lagoon, you're going to say black, based on that. Yes. So for some reason, even people who have not seen that film, even people who have not seen The Creature of Black Lagoon, recognize that it's iconic.
Yep. Sorry, I'm honking. I'm trying to get under the George Washington Bridge right now, so it's a little.
Okay, so do you want? So we know he made The Revenge of the Creature, which was
that was the movie that I wanted to speak about. Was this? The second of the trilogy was The Revenge of the Creature, and of all the three, it's really my favorite. The one that I can just or anything. I think of the three.
What's the third film?
Third film is called The Creature Walks Among Us. So that's probably maybe the more serious of the three. It's maybe even the most adult movie, and also it's with that backdrop of turning the creature from an underwater creature into a land creature, and the pathos of this monster not wanting to be a land creature, being forced to be something he doesn't want to be. That's a much more serious of the three films. This one is the fun one of the three. It's somewhat tongue in cheek, a lot of tongue in cheek humor. The music score, written by I think 5 different composers, including Henry Mancini, was one of the composers. So you have a lot of great talent there. The star is John Agar, who was in a lot of these movies. Revenge of the Creature, it's one I've seen many times, and again, I can sit and watch that movie by itself. The first Creature from the Black Lagoon movie, I feel, is kind of boring, to be honest, even though it's iconic and it's well made and it's beautiful. But it's still it's kind of boring. Whereas Revenge of the Creature, it keeps up the pace. It's fun. It's funny. It's it has one thing that I guess is really iconic about it, or historical about it, is that you have Clint Eastwood, I believe, in his first talking role. He has, I wouldn't call it a cameo because he wasn't famous yet, but he's a college student, a student of John Agar's character, in a kind of a funny joke role. And you see him, it's a young Clint Eastwood, and he's not really doing that good of a job, but it's not Jack Nicholson in Little Shop of Horrors, but
yes. He's called Jennings. Jennings is his name.
I didn't even know he had a name in the scene. I guess I don't know if that was just in the script or he was in another Jack Arnold movie the same year, Tarantula. He didn't have a speaking role there. I don't think you could even really see his face. He was behind an aviator's mask. But in this one, he speaks and he's there. But the film is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's his first film. In the same year he made the other great classic, Anne Francis in the Navy.
Oh yeah, that's right. And is that the Francis movie that has Mara Corday?
Francis in the Navy actually has a bunch of wonderful actors in it. Jim Backus is in it, along with David Jansen and Marty Milner. a lot of actors and actresses who ended up on TV.
I guess he was just there in the Universal backlot, and they found stuff for him to do. It seems like
he also was in the Lady Godiva of Coventry that same year, and Tarantula.
Right. And Tarantula, I know, had Mara Corday, and also John Agar. So John Agar got around there. He was also, I guess, that was the next.
But it's really weird, though. The creature sort of, the creature is a human in a way, right? Because he develops a love relationship with this woman in Florida where he's captured, right?
Yeah, Laurie Nelson plays the main.
The love interest, so to
female character, and she's studying to be an ichthyologist, and there's just the whole story is that they bring the creature from the Amazon up to Florida to be in kind of a SeaWorld aquarium type of a thing, and they're doing both scientific experiments, but there's also the commercial aspect, and you see. And not only is it the commercial aspect of what is in the plot, but there's kind of a commercial in the movie is that you get to see. It's not called SeaWorld. I don't remember the name of the park, but you get to see their shows with the seals and the dolphins and all the other underwater acts there on screen in the movie itself, and they're presented in an entertaining way. Just like you would probably see in real life in 1955 there at this park. So it's and the interesting thing that Leonard Maltin pointed out was one of the Jaws sequels, which I think perhaps was Jaws 3D, had the same plot, that they brought Jaws to SeaWorld in Florida, and he wreaks havoc there. And Leonard Maltin posits that I think, again, it was Jaws 3, which was in 3D, it was called Jaws 3D, was an unofficial sequel to Revenge of the Creature. That was Leonard Maltin's kind of thesis there about that particular Jaws sequel. So interesting how these plots are rehashed.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess what you're saying is because even if you don't want to see Creature from the Black Lagoon, you can watch this one on its own and take some popcorn with you and enjoy it while it's going down.
John Agar, of course, was notable, perhaps notorious, in quite a negative way. He married Shirley Temple, but he apparently was quite abusive to her. So that's kind of a sad part of the story. But he was married to her, I think, a year or two. To Shirley Temple, so there's a little bit of trivia there too. And he always kind of plays the same character in all these movies, where he's kind of the know-it-all scientist that they.
I think he met her in Fort Apache. I think
I believe so.
Right,
yeah.
John Ford's wonderful film, Fort Apache, the Bronx. John Agar plays, I think, one of the second lieutenants or something like that, and of course this was Shirley Temple's one of her important teenage roles, where she plays Philadelphia Thursday, the daughter of very flawed Lieutenant Colonel Owen Thursday. It's actually, I think it's one of Ford's most overlooked subtle films, which is Fort Apache. I think that's where Agar met Shirley Temple there, and I guess he ruined America's sweetheart. So that's not a bad pick. I want to throw in another quick hit. It's worth, if you can watch it on double speed. It's called "It's a Great Feeling." It's a 1949 vehicle for Doris Day, but it's basically a satire on Warner Brothers, made by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was one of the studios that didn't mind turning a little bit of a mirror on itself, as the Looney Tunes, Warner Brothers cartoons always did. And in this film, they sort of make fun of the whole filmmaking industry, the star-making industry, what female stars have to go through. And it's a nice throwaway thing to watch. It's got a couple of cute songs in it. Dennis Morgan and Jack Carson probably has his biggest role here, playing a version of himself as a ham, as an egomaniac, as a liar. And he plays Jack Carson. He's playing himself, but a fictionalized version of himself with enough of the real guy in there that you sort of find it quite appealing. It's great because you actually have Michael Curtis, in a cameo, along with Raoul Walsh, King Vidor, and the director. Yeah, David Butler is in it, and he's the director. he has a cameo. Basically, the reason why they're there is because the directors, none of them want to work with Carson, because Jack Carson is such a ham, such an egomaniac, so terrible to work with. So the plot is that he's got to direct his own film. Dennis Morgan, who of course is scheduled to be the star of the film, but there's no way she's going to work with Jack Carson. Ronald Reagan is in this film as well. So the actual Jane Wyman, Ronald Reagan, Maureen Reagan is in the film as well. Everybody's got a cameo in this film, including someone we extolled a couple of weeks ago, Edward G. Robinson. Shows up when the producer of the film doesn't want to let Carson into the studio because of some shenanigans that he's pulled. Edward G. Robinson shows up at the gate and tries to tough guy his way in. He's got a couple of great lines there. Gary Cooper is in the commissary in a cowboy outfit, basically just saying, yep. It's also a hoot. Sidney Greenstreet shows up there as himself. So basically it has quite a... Joan Crawford has a wonderful cameo. I don't want to spoil it. So if you can watch the film on double speed and you're a film buff, you're going to like seeing this. It's a vehicle for Doris Day. Doris Day is young, fantastic, sprightly. I mean, Doris Day was the total package. And she definitely was. You could see why Warner's wanted to give her this film to exhibit her pipes, her skills, her beauty, her comedic touch, which of course she really perfected into the 50s and 60s and beyond. So it's a great throwaway little nothing. It's even got Mel Blanc doing Bugs Bunny in there. So throw that in. As far as TV goes, Yitzchak, I never thought I was going to say this because I'm sort of ashamed how much I enjoyed it when I was a kid. But I think, especially if you have Prime Video, so many people have Prime because they want to get Amazon shipped to them without paying a lot of different shipping costs. So many of our listeners out there have Prime. Take advantage of watching the first couple of episodes of Lost in Space from 1965. I'm not going to recommend the series in total. I watched it when I was a kid. And
I watched the reruns also when I was a kid.
So, and it's interesting how incredible Lost in Space has been, because you compare it to its rival Star Trek, that is mature, that is intellectual, that is thoughtful. And this one is so much more. Again, it was created by Irwin Allen, who did all these shows in the 60s that I was in love with. I know where Irwin Allen was. Irwin Cohen, later to be called Irwin Allen. But whether it was Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, The Time Tunnel, Land of the Giants, I ate all this stuff up when I was a little kid. I couldn't get enough of it. And I'm sure Irwin Allen is one of the reasons that has fueled my sort of fevered imagination. Lost in Space, and I discovered two very important Jewish influences here. Besides Irwin Allen, who was the producer and obviously probably had a hand in altering the scripts and changing stuff all the time. Yes, I know he was the person who decided that the show would become a lot more campy and it would focus more on the robot and Billy Mummy and during the other seasons, which is one of the reasons why Guy Williams left the show. I mean, Guy Williams was very unhappy with the third season. The show was canceled, they say because of low ratings, but I think it was also because of the expense of the program. I think you have to make it look that those first episodes are very similar to classic sci-fi films of the early and late 50s and 60s. There's a lot of...
I mean, just being in black and white and then turning to color was a big change, but definitely the earlier episodes in black and white have much more of a 50s feel, and then when they're in color, it's that 60s Batman, campy, kitschy feel, that.
Well, they were competing with Batman because Batman in January '66 premiered, and it premiered the exact same time as Lost in Space. So they knew what they were fighting. They knew they had, and as Tom Shabilla has talked about on this program, they knew that they had to go into color coming into the '66 season. But the quality of the director's cinematic choices was weakened by this turn to color as well. There's so many. If you look at in the first one that aired on September 15th, 1965, which is technically the first episode, the pilot, I don't know if it's available. Maybe you can find it somewhere. But the film that starts the whole ball of wax rolling. And you have to understand, unlike Star Trek, the show ended. It was sort of a continuing show, like an old serial. They all ended with cliffhangers. Remember? And you also had, unlike Star Trek, you had one recurring villain throughout, and that was played by the wonderful Jonathan Harris, who was always the guest star, but was really, in many ways, the star of the program. I mean, you had Guy Williams, Zorro, who was handsome and swashbuckling in some way, and always throw a boulder around and fight some alien, and June Lockhart. But really, the locus of the program became this actor, Jonathan Harris, who loved the role, relished the role, and by the time Dr. Smith, is really one of the great villains, I think, of all TV world, of the whole TV world. I mean, to be able to,
he's a lovable villain. He's almost a hero villain.
Right, but he's such a phony. He's such a grandiose liar. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, as brilliant as Star Trek is in terms of what Nimoy did as Spock, but you really have to say that Jonathan Harris, he was, for 3 years, he was really, consistently on his game. And in many ways, like you say, people really tuned in for him. Jonathan Harris's real name was Jonathan Daniel Harasuchin, and he was born in the Bronx. His parents were Russian Jews. And his mother, I think they took him to the Yiddish theater, and he said, I'm going to shake my Bronx accent. He watched British movies. He read Shakespeare. And this way, he became, he really reimagined himself, and he never really taking himself so terribly seriously. So I think, now, Bill Mummy, I mean, look, you could take him or leave him. He was sort of obnoxious as a kid. I guess you could believe that he was this precocious, brilliant child who could figure stuff out and figure out things that even the pilot of Jupiter 2 couldn't figure out. But I guess I was sort of jealous of Billy Mummy because he was sort of like me. He was a little redheaded kid with freckles, and here he was, this big movie star in this show. So I guess I sort of it was hard for me.
He wrote a book now about his experiences on the show. So maybe.
Yeah. Again, he was. I think he once said on an interview that this was great for him. He felt like he was a superhero because, in the way he became the star of the show, along with the robot. And there was sort of a diminutive fellow who actually inhabited the robot's body. But it was the voice of the robot that I think was it was sort of the system that actually the first 7 episodes and the first 2 and maybe even more of the first season were written by an Orthodox Jew, Shimon Winzelberg. The first episode, if you take a look at the credits, it's by S. Bar David. So I knew right away that we're talking about somebody Jewish, but I didn't realize that it was actually someone who had written hundreds of episodes. Shimon Winzelberg, who supposedly, according to the obituaries in the Washington Post and other places, saw himself as a mentor for Orthodox Jews, and there were Orthodox Jews that wanted to work in this business, and he made sure that he gave them a leg up, maybe in terms of writing. He wrote a number of episodes of Jews and Westerns. I mentioned to you off pod, Have Gun Will Travel, that had a Jew in the West. Possibly, we know he wrote for Gunsmoke. It could be that Gunsmoke episode was also with the Jew, was also written by him. But he also wrote things that had nothing to do with Judaism. He wrote an award-winning play about Japanese immigrants in the 1950s. He also wrote for one of my favorite shows, The Wild Wild West, Mannix, another show of my youth, even a couple of episodes of Dynasty. So Shimon Winzelberg, and it's great to see that name up in your credits, because in the second episode you'll see that Shimon Winzelberg. So somebody who's proud of his Jewish name. Look, Jonathan Harris had to make, I'm sure at that today you could get away with being Winzelberg, but Harris knew what he had to do. But Winzelberg stayed Orthodox, sort of like Rebecca character in Ivanhoe. And didn't submit to what Hollywood would offer, kept Shabbos, and wrote really probably, episodes. I don't say that they're infused with Jewish philosophy, Jewish understanding, but definitely to take advantage of the opportunities, because everybody was watching TV and you needed someone with new ideas. So I would say, look, the longevity of Lost in Space is quite interesting. I mean, there is a Netflix series as well. There was a rebooted film. It's interesting how Yitzchak that there's something about what that show wanted to do that still rings a bell. Instead of having mature characters from all different planets like the Enterprise, this is basically about a family again. There's something about the snot-nosed boy genius, the little girl on the cusp of adolescence and discovering, things about her life. Of course, Angela Cartwright played that role when she had been in Make Room for Daddy. Rounding out the characters is Mark Goddard, who plays Major Don West, and he's the sort of the pilot of the Jupiter 2, and they need him around to pilot the stuff. And even in the first episode, you see there's something electric between him and Judy Robinson. But, I always saw she is definitely just eye candy. I'm not sure if she does any real acting throughout the whole 3 years that was played by Marta Kristen. But I think he has said in interviews, Mark Goddard, that Irwin Allen said, look, there's not going to be any romance, no hugging and kissing between them, although that's clear in the first episode that there is stuff going on between them. And I think, once you have to, how many monsters can you visit? You know what I'm saying? How many monsters, how many places? But I think there's a lot of great throwbacks, especially even though the third season, I think, is ridiculous. Do you remember there's an episode, where I think they go to a planet of robots, right? And I think Robbie the robot is like the leader.
Yeah, they took Robbie the robot out to the.
Yeah, I think Robbie the robot
made his rounds.
Yeah. I think it's actually the actual Robbie the robot is there, and I think he's sort of the leader of this robot planet. And the robot shows up there, and it's like I said, it's quite.
I mean, a lot of people, if they don't see them together, they confuse the two. But
right, they were designed by the same designer. The same one who designed Robbie designed the robot of Lost in Space. But really, what's interesting, of course, is that you compare the robot who was, like I said, the voice of the robot, and danger, Will Robinson, danger. And of course Bob May was the diminutive fellow who was inside the robot. And I think during the 3 years of the program, there was quite a assemblage of Hollywood actors and wannabes. Michael Rennie, of course, who was from The Day the Earth Stood Still, showed up in a two-parter in the very first season as well. So you really have, it was really a TV in the '60s pushing the envelope in a way, trying to come up with something that everybody in the family could watch, which of course doesn't exist anymore today.
Episodes are still funny and campy, but there's a little bit more serious. I think there's something just about that style that once it went into color, it started to be over the top. Which Revenge of the Creature didn't go over the top. I think it hit that sweet spot for me, at least, as far as a funny monster movie that has some scary times, and I think that's also what the first season of Lost in Space has that the other seasons don't have. It's not really scary anymore, and I think that's also of Dr. Smith is much more of a villain in the black and white episodes and much more pathetic in the color episodes, and that could even just be a product if we take it as an actual character arc and not a decision that was made for any commercial reason. It could actually represent his descent into a type of mental illness over the despair of actually being lost in space. He starts off as this really nefarious character and develops into this goofy.
If you think about it, in the very first episode, he's ready to kill everybody on board. He's an agent of Russia or some other government, and he's ready to basically sabotage and kill this innocent family and destroy the ship. So he isn't just a coward. He's a murderer, and the fact that guy really sustained this series for all those years, for 3 years, I think that's saying a lot. Interesting entry that's somewhat overlooked in the storied career of Max Ophüls. Max Ophüls is known as one of the greatest directors of all time. Also, a Jewish refugee, basically, who from Germany, who born Maximilian Oppenheim. And Max Ophüls' American noir flick of 1949, I believe, is definitely worth watching. It's called Caught, and it has Robert Ryan at his most intense and evil. We've talked about Robert Ryan before, and he is quite nasty and great in this one. Barbara Bel Geddes is in this film. She's the star, normatively. It's also got a wonderful part for James Mason, who also plays very much the good guy in this. And it's about desiring and talking yourself into what you think you want. And Barbara Bel Geddes' character goes through a very interesting growth arc throughout the film. It's a surprising film, although it's very much, you would say, a genre pick in terms of a woman's pick and a film noir shot very darkly, but it definitely it's worthwhile. It's anything Ophüls did was done with a lot of panache and expertise and something very, very different. So you can catch that as well. It's called Caught. So catch Caught if you can. Take care, Yitzchok. Be careful, Yitzchok. Watch your step on the way, everybody. Take care. We'll see you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.